There, now they should have audio.
You know, stuff like that. It's really kind of
Soon.
It's a legal project.
Do you have your audio muted or unmuted?
Yeah, muted right now.
Or you could use headphones, I guess. Yeah. I just want to make sure they can hear us.
It's like basic defect tracking is what it is. Right. But it's
What part of the video do you see right now?
you never know.
All right, I'm going to switch to my code, and you should hear me talking at some point in the meantime.
That's how I got it.
Yeah.
The whole click tracking, I stumbled into it. So.
I just heard some.
That's from my computer.
Oh. Okay, so I do have audio then, right?
Yeah, it's kind of quiet though. I would expect it to be louder.
There's a big place down here.
You're like direct competitors with our last job.
Well, how quiet's your audio?
So, you ever hear
Goes all
best
the
rate
way up.
referral? Best rate referrals?
You know how
I don't
even know what you're
Let's see what we can do
It's a
here.
company called bestratereferrals.com. These are the mortgage advertising. I'm assuming.
Can I turn this up,
What you
maybe?
guys do?
We do
It's like
a wide range of advertising.
Yeah, I'm looking for
design, marketing campaigns.
I know what I can do.
websites,
Let's do this.
Custom development projects.
That's what I want.
As in, like either building sites or like looking at APIs and stuff like that for people, helping them with integrations.
That's exactly what they do too.
Let's just do
There's a lot of companies that do similar stuff.
Okay, we'll see how well that works out. I guess.
We don't have a.
I should get a lot louder in a minute.
I mean, we do a lot of. There's a lot of companies that do similar stuff.
Okay.
They grew on that way.
Should I turn it back down? Can you mute that for a minute? Just so it doesn't feed back into this. There we go. No, but it will be because it's going to pick it up and play it, pick it up. And, you know what? We ran into this while we were testing this at Winghouse. Like, because my thing was playing it. Or you want to unmute it? It should be. It's been. Will you unmute it? We ran into this while we were testing this at Winghouse. Okay. Right. Let's just leave yours muted. And if they need to turn me down, they should do that themselves. Is that probably a good idea? Okay. Okay, I'm good to go, and it's 10 minutes late. So you guys good to start?
But their only client was
So if you guys already understand Eloquent, this might be a little bit basic of a talk for you. But I specifically did this because I know that Harry and Tarek are both new to Laravel. And one of the things that I see most often people get confused with is when you define your relationships using Eloquent, when you should use the relationship method versus the magic property that Laravel or Eloquent gives to you. So I've got a little outline here with what are relationships. Is there anybody who does not know what a relationship is? Okay, good. We can just skip this section. But Laravel supports all of them, which is your one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many. And I would purposely skip this polymorphic relations thing because that one's kind of a harder thing to understand. I didn't want to get too diverged down this talk.
No polymorphic?
Well, I don't want to talk about it because it'd just be too. It would distract us too much, I feel like. So Laravel has functions for all of these relationships, which is the intuitive name. So there's a has one method that you can put on a model, or a belongs to, or a has many, belongs to many, something of that nature that you can put on these. And when you have these relationship objects, so like this user post here, you would just define this function posts on your user model. And then that would give you the relationship object itself. So this is different than the resulting, like what the relationship would give you back in terms of if you wanted the related entity itself. So if you wanted the posts, like collection of posts that a user has, you would not want to call this method with the parentheses. This method with the parentheses is actually a relationship object, which is actually a has many object, which is also an instance of a query builder. And all of you have used this query builder, whether you realize it or not, but it's just saying where you call your wheres and your order bys and like the SQL abstraction, if you will, is what the query builder is. And there's a Eloquent query builder, which just kind of passes on to the regular query builder, and they do it using magic methods, so it's kind of hard to trace through if you run into an error. Like if you try calling a function posts on this user model, but you don't have it defined, it actually complains about the query builder object rather than the Eloquent query builder object. And this is because of the call method, the double underscore call method, because it proxies it off. So it's a little annoying to deal with it that way. It'd be nicer if they actually had like functions that passed it right through. It'd be a little bit easier to follow that way, but they don't. So this DB : is their database facade that you can use Query Builder for. I'm not a fan of doing this because you would have to define the table you want. Like you have to do DB table where get. I mean, it just makes more sense to me to use the user model in this case. So everybody uses Query Builder, again, whether you realize it or not. So this posts, it looks like an instance variable, and this is resolved magically through the magic method that PHP has for the _get. And when you try calling a property on an Eloquent model that doesn't exist, Eloquent has all these things it tries to do to resolve it for you. In this case, it looks at this and it's like, oh hey, this could be a relationship. And it looks for a relationship method. And in this case, we have one called posts, and it will do this fetching for you behind the scenes, so you don't have to like take the method and turn it into a collection and transform it. It just does it for you. And this is where people get confused. So the easiest way I can map this thing for people is this user post get is literally equals to the user posts variable. So does this not make sense to anybody before we move further? Okay. So then we have relational conditions we can do, or conditional relationships we can do. And that's really fun. So you could do like a recent posts thing, and you could apply a where condition, and you would still get a relationship, like an instance variable on your model, rather than having to filter out the collection yourself with like a where or a filter or something of that nature. So to demonstrate some of this, instead of having a front-end application where we loop over a bunch of fancy pants front-end stuff, I just did all this through tests. And if we can just assume that the not equals and equals assertions all are correct, we can just look at this and hopefully things will make sense. So is this visible for everybody? Let's try to make this bigger. Okay. And if I'm moving too fast, let me know. So we're going to start with this top method. Relationship with parens is different than without. So this is just going to do the thing I described to you, that when we call the relationship method versus the relationship property, they're going to be different things. In this case, we're just asserting they're not the same, or they're not equals to each other. We could do assert not same, but that would compare object IDs, and that's always going to be different. So we'll just test this one method, and we get green. We could go ahead and just take out the not, and then run the same thing. Ooh, don't do that. And then run the same thing, and now we get red. So our test at least shows that these are different things, right? And I think this is probably the biggest part of confusion for people when they start using Eloquent, because sometimes they'll use the parentheses, sometimes they won't. And the farther you get down away from just grasping this understanding, the harder it becomes and the more confused you get, especially when you start applying collection methods to the same thing. Because there's a where method on the collection that you would apply to this right side thing on the comma. There's a where collection method that the collection itself is very extensive API, but you can also call where on the query builder, because obviously it's going to do your where for your SQL. And I think that's where most people get confused, because you can call where on both things. And then when do you use get, when do you not use get? That's when you start looking into this using parens and not using the parens. So the next one I have is this has many equaling the same thing. So in my setup method, I kind of glossed over that because I didn't want to get distracted. I set up some posts and applied them to a user, and you can see here that this is the same test. Glenn, you should have caught this for me. Anyway, so this is the same test, but it's fine. But we have 5 posts here, and I've applied them to a user, and we'll see that it's still the same thing here. And this test passes. And then we have this belongs to, so this will get us like one instance of a user, if you will. And so I've applied this to this user thing, and we can make sure that our very first post that we had, I tied it to the same user for our test user variable. And this will just show us that it's the same thing here. And this is just all showing the relationships and trying to make sense of everything. And then this one passes as well. So I think another thing we could do here is we could do this, assert equals. And then we could do this user, and then post first. That gives us our first post from the SQL. And then we're going to call this user relationship method. And then what would I put here to make this synonymous with the thing on the left side of the comma? Ethan, you don't get to answer this because I know you know it. Does anybody else know this besides Glenn?
I mean, get, right?
You would not use get, actually, but that's a good guess.
I would get the array.
Yes.
It's just first. Right?
Yeah, first. And then we could, do this. And then we'll have two assertions here.
We forgot the user method string.
Where, oh, thank you.
That's why that was confusing.
Sorry, guys. Yeah, so see here now that this bottom line is synonymous. And this one's an interesting case because, again, the get method would give you a collection of users. And we don't want a collection of users. We want the first user that finds relating to this thing.
Because we know there's one.
Right. Yeah. Since it belongs to, knows there's one object, it just says get the first one. So then we have our conditional relationship. This is really fun to me because we can have, say, now I'm going to go to our setup method. So we have our 5 posts. This actually didn't help it out at all. We're creating these random at created dates, and the timestamps the way they work in Laravel is they get set to now. As soon as it creates it, it just does it now. So we have our user here, and then we have our posts here, and then we just save them through the relationship. So conditional. So I changed one of them. Just whatever first post I had, I changed it towards 8 days ago, right? I just subtracted 8 days. And now I just want to make sure that this other relationship for recent post, rather than just posts, will only give me 4 items. And then this also works. So if I were to do this assert count 4 and then user posts, that should fail because user has 5 posts, but only has 4 of them that are within the 8-day range. Does this make sense? Okay. Do you guys want me to show that we still have 5 total posts on the user, or are we all good? Okay. So we're going to move on to this creating related records thing. I have a pet peeve, I guess. Yeah.
Stop here.
A lot of people just default to creating a related record using this relational ID, right, with this method. So they'll do like post create, they'll give it an array of things, and one of those fields will be the user ID. I am not a big fan of this, and I realize that most often you're not going to be changing your database schema midway through a project, especially for related keys of table names, because if you start changing table names, like you have a lot bigger project ahead of you. But this is just one of those abstraction-related things, and it doesn't really matter what key you want to use. And a good example of this, in our current app, we do have what I think of an incorrectly named related key on one of our tables, and one of these days I would really like to change it. If we always use the relationship method, I can change it blindly, and nobody's going to be the wiser. It'll just work. And one of these days, I'd like to just do that. Now, because I know that we're using this like underscore ID field in there, I know I'm going to have to change that in all of those places first, and that's its own daunting task. But at least after that, I can change the relationship, I can change the key name, and it'll just, poof, it'll just work, as long as I go through the relationship methods. So this is some of the ways you can do this. It's not an exhaustive list. And the most 2 common ways you'll see this is going through the user post relationship and then doing a save or a create. And sometimes a save mini, if you already have several posts created or made, the difference between create and make is if it's persisted or not to the database. And then you can save a collection of posts or an array of posts. As long as it's traversable, it doesn't matter if it's an array or a collection or anything that implements traversable would be fine.
Create or save, right? Not create or make.
So save means you've already got one made and you want to save it to the database. So you could do like post : make, and then it's not persisted, and then you have to do save.
I thought you said make.
No, I did. You can make and then call user post. So like this first one, user post save post here. If this is a non-persistent model, that's fine. It'll work. It'll save both of them. It'll just update this model and then save it in the database with the user ID.
I thought you said the method make.
No, if I do post : make, and then pass an array of options like body and content or whatever, right? And I don't specify a user ID. Even if I do specify a user ID, it doesn't matter.
You call it make on a model?
I do sometimes, sure. I do it in my factories all the time when I do tests. Yeah, I do it test all the time.
I've never done it.
Really?
Yeah. I didn't even think of.
Well, why? I guess my point is why do 2 queries?
I thought it was a factory method. I didn't realize it was a model method.
You can do post : make, and it'll make an unpersistent model. It's just like when you call new post and pass an array. It's the same thing.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So it'd be the same as new instance then, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, if you call new post and give an array of options, yeah, you can do that, or you can do post : make.
Right. To me, it's clear new instance.
I feel like make might be cool though because you could, like somewhere.
It's literally not any different.
Something modifies it in the middle of it, maybe like a setter or something. I guess it would do it either way.
Yeah, it would work either way.
It's like the same thing. Right?
So another way you can do that is this create method here. And make is still available here. You could call make instead of create, but then it would not be persisted, and then what's the point, right? But you can call user post create because again, this is a query builder. So anything you can do with a query builder, and this is also like an Eloquent child. That's the right word, I think. Yeah. So this is still like an Eloquent model is what, and a query builder. It's a lot of things. But since you have this, you can call create and make and any of the other functions like exists in any of those functions because it's still a model here.
So if you call it make, does it attach to the post?
Yeah, it would.
Or attach to the user?
Yeah, if you call make here, it'd still give user ID, whatever.
It won't be in the database.
Correct. Make is just an unpersistent model.
That'd be cool, like to pass back the user model, like
I mean,
in a JSON or something. You know what I mean? Like
well, you can, and if you remember
like
part
like
of
a
this
preview, like here's what you might have. You can say this entire collector, this entire model. But here's a preview.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean that's a possibility, but it would.
I feel like I find myself creating like my own like
creating
instances of models, but not ever actually saving them. But I feel like you could use make there. It'd be cool. I didn't know you could do that. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's all good. And then we have post user. So this is going the other way through the relationship, right? So if we have a post and we're like, I don't want to give it a user ID because again, my nitpick is like, let's not talk about the user ID column. We can go through the user relationship, associate it with a user instance or a user model. And here's the most annoying part about this, you still have to call save. It would be really awesome if associate would also save it for you, but it doesn't.
Doesn't sync do that?
I'm not sure, maybe.
What version are we talking?
Well, I mean, this is all the way through 4.2 when I started, but...
Because I was thinking, doesn't he have new methods for this? And
well, there's like first or create, there's update or create, there's a lot of
I think that
sugars, but yeah.
the one that does, I think there's one called sync, SY.
NC?
Yeah,
And you can give it a user or...
But you have to give it the ID. You give it like an array of IDs.
Yeah, see, I don't want to do, yeah.
But I don't know, so why don't,
you
don't ever want to see a hard-coded ID in your code? Or what?
I prefer, the only time I like to see that is when you're using a non-standard, in terms of like naming convention for Laravel, keeping Laravel happy, is if, for example, we have one that's not standard. So we have a mail tracking table, and we have a mail tracking queue table in our database at work. And the mail tracking queue table has a column called mailing ID.
Right.
And that's
instead of just ID.
Or mail tracking ID. What?
What if it was a constant?
I would still prefer not to. But so the mail tracking queue table has a column called mailing ID, and that's a relationship to the mail tracking table, which that alone is not immediately obvious. And it gets even worse when inside one of the columns in the mail tracking queue is a JSON, like a JSON string that has a mailing ID in there that's not the same mailing ID as the mailing ID column.
Right.
So this gets really confusing really quick. And in this one particular case, because it's so confusing, and it's caught both of us off guard several times, we'll just change this value, and it just blew up. I'm like, oh, well, if we always go through the relationship, that'll never be a problem, first off. And second off, after I get everything away from using the mailing ID string inside their updates and creates and all that stuff, and I start going through the relationship or the inverse relationship, whichever way I want to go, I can then just make a change to the relationship. I could make a migration to do an update, like add a column, and give the mail tracking ID column the value of the mailing ID column. That's an easy query, right? Just update A equals B, and it'll just happen. And then I can drop the mailing ID column altogether, and then I can get rid of the specialized key name from the mail tracking relationship, and it'll just work.
Right.
And then I don't have to change anything else in the code is after I've gotten away from using that string and all the other places.
So here's my question though. I guess where I'm confused is I'm not sure, like when you say using related ID, are you talking about every model? I don't know. Most models that I make, I just use the generic Laravel pattern, and there's an ID column called ID. That's usually the ID column of it, and it's got an integer ID that increments, right? So is that when you say using the related ID, you can have a model like post, right?
Yeah.
And you can get a $ post out of the first post, and then you can say post ID, right?
Yeah, well, I'm talking like, so a post has a user relationship. So there'd be a user ID column on the post table.
Right.
And then that'll be the ID of a user that exists in the user's table.
Manually setting the foreign key.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess the question is, when you declare the relation in your model, isn't that where that's all set? Aren't there extra parameters for setting what that key is?
If you deviate.
You can override it, yeah.
But there's a standardized naming convention to keep Laravel happy.
Yeah. What is that? I guess that's...
It's just table name _ ID.
Okay.
So, well, the singular form of the table name underscore ID. So if you have a users table, it drops the S and then adds underscore ID.
Okay.
So let's go back to the mailing ID and the mail tracking ID thing I was telling you about earlier. We have a mailing or a mail tracking table and a mail tracking queue table. It's a weird relationship because it actually goes from a mail tracking queue, which is like a regular job queue. You've got a job that like runs in the background, sips off to somewhere, and once that's satisfied, it creates a mail tracking record. So when you create the mail tracking record, it sets a mailing ID in the mail tracking queue table, not a mail tracking ID, which is what the Laravel convention would want it to be. Right? So because of that, when you create the mail tracking relationship, you have to pass it another parameter to say, hey, use this key instead.
I'm with you now. I know.
Right.
I was just trying to figure out, is that what he's talking about?
Yeah.
You're like the extra parameter.
Well, it's also like if I create a mail tracking queue record, because it has a mailing ID column, I'd do like, new mail tracking queue, and I'd be like mail date, mail class, all the other stuff. And then I'd also do mailing ID, and if there's a corresponding mail tracking record, I would give it that integer, right? I don't like setting that ID in any sort of update, any sort of create, any sort of new, because I like going through the relationship. So I actually do, and I make it a huge point, including in all of our code reviews, to where if I see an underscore ID thing getting set, I'm like, hey, let's not do that. I realize it's an extra line of code to go through a relationship and do like an associate, or going through the relationship afterwards or something of that nature. But it will allow me the freedom at some point in the future to where everything that's doing in like the string mailing ID, I'll be able to get rid of that completely, and it won't have any adverse effects in our code once I change the table to actually have the... I don't like the mailing ID column because it's confusing to me, because it's used in two places and it's two different things, but it's the same name. So I'd rather use mail tracking ID for the thing that means mail tracking ID. And if we never used the mailing ID string in our code base, I could just do it and nothing would break. I would just have to change the one function that changes the key name. I would just drop that third parameter and be done.
So that's where we go. You just want to avoid having to put those extra parameters in as much as possible. And just
but I'm okay with the parameters, but what I don't like is, let's just drop it in the code for a minute.
It's like anti-pattern.
Yeah.
So what I don't want to do is this. Post, create, right? And this is like your standard way to create a post if you want. Like this will persist it, and I don't know why. Whoops. So you would do like user ID to belong to a user, right? And we'd be like user ID, right? This is how we normally, this is like a way we could do this.
Yeah, okay.
This is what I don't like. Because if we put this and say the user's controller, the post controller, or some sort of like recent post controller, and it doesn't matter how many places, say it's 5, say it's 10, say it's 2. Now I have to change each one of those places if I want to change the user ID column to user specialized ID or something, if I have it in a new table.
Like that's what relationships are there for.
Right.
So you don't have to do that.
The method to go through the relationship abstracts this line of code away from me. But if I don't let it abstract it away from me, I've still just kind of screwed myself. And we have this problem in the current app I work in. And I can't just change the method. Because like if we wanted to change this key to like specialized or something, I don't know of a case you'd actually do this, but say...
Yes, I mean, sometimes you get databases that you can't control, right? Like sometimes you have to work with a project and somebody else made the database and it's got...
Absolutely. And if you're like, hey, I want to change this key name. In this case, if I have this key name here, I can't just change it in the database and everything's fine. Because then, like, the changes wouldn't stick because it would still be updating the wrong column. And then, or if I deleted the wrong column, now I'd get a bunch of SQL errors because the column's not found. But if I always just never did this, and I always just did like a create, and then I did something like post, user, associate, user, save, this would go through the relationship for me just fine. And it would save the user ID because it would go through the user relationship and be like, oh, hey, it wants a user ID because it knows. Like it's in one place. It's in the post model, right?
Wouldn't it make more sense to reverse that statement? So
Absolutely, it would be, and create it from the user.
Yeah.
That's how I would normally do it. But if for whatever reason you're creating a post first, say it's a new post controller, right? You would probably get a request, do your validation on the request, and then you'd be like, okay, it's valid because have you used the form requests in Laravel?
No, I'm actually using Lumen, so I've got an entire different front end.
Sure. So a form request, when it comes into a controller, you can create it's just a custom form request.
Yeah,
and
I've worked on the last project. We had probably 4 different ancillary sides of the project that used the validation rules and so forth that Laravel has.
Great. So if you do this at the controller level, you can actually get all the validation out of the controller. So if you actually get to the controller, you know you have valid data already. But you still have access to the request object if you want to get. In our last meetup, we use that to like filter out the fields we wanted from the request. For example, we just like did like a return only and gave it like a list of keys. So if you make it to the controller and you have your validation set up, then you might just want to do post create and then just take the request object. And depending on if you have like guarded or fillable or any of those things set on your model, it'll just create one for you. But then you'd have to associate it to a user. So you could then do user ID equals. We're back to that thing that I don't like though. Or we could do this line here. That's a case you would want to do it. Or sync. I haven't used sync, so I don't want to speak for it. But I mean, if you say it works, I'm more than willing to believe you.
It's great, but you can do multiple relationships. You know, many to many and things like that.
Well, with many to many, that might be useful because like ID keys are kind of harder to abstract away.
But
it's still possible.
Yeah, even still though, I think I get what you're saying, but I never really run into the problem that I never really use. If I ever have to have an ID, I will ask for that ID. I guess I will use a relationship.
Okay, so what about this scenario? If you use this string ID everywhere in your app, every time you create a post, you want to set the user ID. But then you decide someday, you know what, only specialized users, which are the users specialized table, or the specialized users table, doesn't matter, but say you want only specialized users to do this. So you want to change the key name, specialized user ID. How do you do that? You have to change every one of your call sites that has this string. Me, I would change one function. That's it.
No, right. I see what you're saying.
So that's just why I do it. And when I first started using relationships in Eloquent, I was like, okay, I kind of see the point to like use the method, but like, okay, how often are these things going to change? And then I started working where I work now, and I was like, oh man, I'm glad my attitude's changed because I want to shoot myself right now. It's really a pain when you actually want to make a change like that. It's a pretty big pain because you have to look for that string. So I can grep through my project or do like a recursive search or whatever through my project and find that string. But then the problem with that is, if you recall, we use that same term, mailing ID, in two columns in our database. One of them refers to another table. One of them does not.
Okay.
So then I have to look for all usages of it and figure out, is this the mail tracking record or the fake mailing ID thing that doesn't actually matter?
So how about maybe this is getting ahead of ourselves, but how about like to solve that problem? This is probably bad, you probably won't like it, but what about just putting another relationship on? Because, you know, you can have multiple relationships, right? And just name it something else.
But it's going to have another ID on there and you're going to run into the same problem.
No, you put that ID in the third parameter. You know how there's several parameters. I don't know if you can go to
a transitional state.
Well, like if you can go to, I don't know if you can go to the documentation.
Sure, absolutely.
Go to the API documentation.
For like setting up like a has one.
Yeah. Right. Or
why is this not?
Just go on the left-hand side. You can go right to the API.
This API? Because that's not what we want.
Keep going up.
Up or down?
Up. Right there, API documentation.
Oh, I see. You're going to want to show the...
yeah, if you go to like Eloquent...
Eloquent has like one.
Eloquent,
why is that not there?
Model,
it'll be easier for me to do this. You're wanting something like this, right?
Yeah, because it shows you, I think, in there.
Match one? No. This guy, maybe.
Has many or one to many.
Why is this not in here? Has relationships.
There you go.
There you go. This, right? This is what you're talking about?
Right.
So you have a foreign key. This is really great for the case that I use this at work. We have a mailing ID column that should be called mail_tracking_ID. So we have to use this second parameter in our, it's actually has many, not has one, but it's the same order of parameters.
Right.
So we have to use that parameter to change it if we want to go through the relationship. But this is, I'm okay with putting ID here.
Right.
I'm okay with it here.
But what I'm saying is, have a second one. Same relation, different name. Right. Just have second.
Oh, to put a different column on it? Well, the problem is I still have to change all my call sites if I do that. I want to avoid changing everywhere I call this relationship.
Yeah.
And again, if you do that, but you do a post create with the second column _ID, it's the same workload that you're doing to fix that.
Yeah, but I guess I was saying like you could break up your refactoring into a couple steps that way, because you can just add the column in the database, make the second relation.
It's
The column. And
it's not the steps of the refactoring I don't like. It's the fact that I have to change it in 2 or 5 or 10 or infinite number of places, depending on how many places I call it. That's the thing I don't like. It's not that I have to do the refactoring in multiple steps or 1 step or 2 steps. It's, hey, if I always went through the relationship, I would change it 1 line of code to change a database column name. Whereas if I add a second column and have to change everything to use the second column, I'd have to change unknown amount of lines of code. If I were to add a second relationship, I'd have to change unknown amount of, you know what I mean?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, the use case I was thinking was more like somebody comes into your office and it's the boss, whatever, and he sits on the side of your desk and says, the client needs this tomorrow, you know? And you're like, God, Jesus, I don't want to go and refactor my whole code base, you know, because this doesn't fit. Well, maybe just throw an extra relation in there.
You still have to refactor though. In both situations, you have to refactor.
Eventually you will.
No, even in your case. Like, if you want to decline stuff and be like, oh, I don't want to refactor this, but I still have to use a different key name, you still have to change that key name in every line of code that uses that key name. But in my situation, I still only have to change it in 1 line.
Right.
Like, there's not a situation where you add a key, add a column, where it's better than changing 1 line of code. If you can change 0 lines of code, then great. But I mean, 1 line of code is pretty short. So that was an exhaustive debate. Guys, are we ready to move on? So let's go back to this guy. So we have this associate thing we can do if we want to go the inverse relationship. I touched on save many a minute ago. I'm only going to brush on this permissions attach, because if you have a many-to-many relationship, and I specifically chose permissions here, because that is a case where you'll have a many-to-many relationship, whereas like you don't normally have many posts and many users, but a lot of times you will have many users to many permissions. So attach is how you do this for many-to-many, and I'm only bringing this up specifically to say this is how you do it on a many-to-many relationship, even though I haven't covered that. So now we can go back to our tests and start proving some of this. Oh, let's undo some of these lines of code here. Great. So creating related records. I'm just going to go through each one of these to show that they all work, and they'll assign it to the user. Now, I'd like to point out I'm not using the this user variable. I'm using a locally scoped user variable to show like I don't have 5 posts like we do in all of our other tests. This is a local variable instead of an instance variable. So I'm creating a user with a user factory. In this case, I could have just done the regular user create. It doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to go through the post relationship and do this thing that I just said I didn't like, right? And then we're going to go through this post relationship and then save it. We'll do a post create. And then we'll do an associate if we have a post and want to give it a user. Do all of these lines make sense to everybody? Anybody have questions? Okay, so I'm going to run this test, and I'm going to hope that I have 4 posts with my user relationship and my assertion passes. So, are we good here? All right. So I want somebody to tell me why I have this expected exception here, bad method call exception, when I run this line of code, and I will get green in this case means I have this exception thrown. Red means this exception does not get thrown. This test passes. Why do I get a bad method call exception? Not you, Ethan.
Not using the query object?
Yes. So in this case, we're using the posts collection. And if I were to take this off and run this, oh, I'm not asserting anything. This should throw a, there we go. Method create does not exist. So the reason why this is a problem is we have a post collection. And this is saying, hey, your collection object does not have a create method on it. Now, this would have been really bad if it did, and I had to find a different way to write this test. But I did run all these tests before I got in here today. So, whoops. So good. So does everyone understand why that doesn't work? I know Tarek answered it. Okay. So now we're going to get onto our lazy loading and eager loading, and that'd be the n+1 problem. Does anybody not know what n+1 problem is? Do you not? Okay. So the situation. Okay. So the common situation is you do one query to get a result, like a result set. Like say, I want to get a list of users, okay? And then you have a loop that ends up inside the loop you call a query, okay? So you might just do like a fetch all users. And then let's say you have a page that says, you know what, let's just display a user's post count. Like, let's just show our top 10 active users. We'll do like users 1 through 10, we'll sort them by like who has the most amount of posts, right? Say Harry has 20 posts and Tarek has 12. So he's completely dominating you in the blogging industry, right? So I don't know who blogs more, by the way, so it was not a jab either way. So this is an n+1 problem because inside your for each, you do something like, so you do like for each user as user, and then like we're gonna like create like a table of records, like, you know, and inside your table generating script, you'll then do like a select all from post where user ID equals whatever the user ID is in the loop that we're inside. So if it's going to be your one query for your users, and if you limit it to 10, you're going to do one query to get 10 users. Then you're going to loop over those 10 users. You're going to do another 10 queries to your post table.
Okay.
Right? So this is very slow. I think you guys could agree. Well, can be slow. It can be fast. Can be slow. So Laravel has what they call lazy loading, and everything resolves lazily in terms of without telling it beforehand you want it to resolve early. And eager loading is how you do this ahead of time. So if we were to go back to our users post relationship, let's just say that we do user where last signed in within a week, and then we do like, we get those users and we limit it to 10, and then on our front end page we do for each users as user, and do like user arrow post arrow count, and that'll just tell us how many posts are in the, or how many posts are in each user's post collection. Does this make sense? So because post is resolved lazily up front, it's not going to actually get the post collection until you loop over it and count it. Does this make sense? You're probably like, I feel like my API isn't slow that I played with at home, James, but this doesn't get slow until you work with large data sets.
And it does that lazy loading by default?
Absolutely.
Because you're not actually getting the results of the query, you're just getting...
Right. So when you want to use like the user the user post relationship, so this guy here, when you want this, it actually doesn't resolve it until you call it. What's up, Dave?
That's not the relation, that's the collection.
For sure. It is. This is a collection of posts.
Okay.
But this variable posts does not get resolved until you call it for the first time. Unless you tell it ahead of time, but we're still on the lazy loading part. So Laravel does this because if you were to eager load everything, then you would be querying, like sometimes you have like 20 relationships on some models. Some people would argue that's bad code design, but avoiding that argument. If you have 20 relationships on models, you're going to be doing minimum 20 queries every time you want that model. And then if you get into that, then like, you know, sometimes like models are related to each other, so you end up doing like a bunch of recursive queries because you're calling a model that calls the model that calls it as well. And let's avoid that sort of like inception. But you guys get the point. This posts property, which is not a real property on the object, remember it's resolved through the magic getter method. It's not resolved until you call it. So if you were to do something like user post count, this would still resolve it if it has not already been resolved, but it does not re-resolve it. So if you call user post and then 5 lines later you do user post again, it doesn't do another query. At least I don't think. I might be wrong. I probably should have looked that up before I said
count is
that.
different anyway, count.
Well, count just counts the collection items, but this thing. All right, so now that we're all done adjusting our chairs.
So just to recap here, you created a user and you created it, meaning it's in the database with an ID, and then you created 5 posts, basically different ways.
This is 4, not 5, yes.
4 posts, different ways, right?
Yeah.
First way is the way you don't like. You said it's a smell.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The second way you use make. That's a weird one. Okay, well, how's the post B getting set? You're saying give me the relation of all the posts and then save this one thing, and you're saying save this class that I'm making, so it doesn't have an ID. All right, I think I got it.
All right.
That's weird. Okay, so you could get rid of the post : class, right, and just go post : make, right?
Yeah, I just use the post factory here to just when I run my tests, I use factories, so that way at some point you can define your fake data in a factory, and it will satisfy all of your conditions if you need like a name or a message body, stuff like that. And you can override it with passing an array to it.
So in post C, then you're doing the same thing. You're grabbing the relation, the post relation on the post model,
and just calling create on it,
calling create,
which is the same as calling post create, except I already have a user ID set at this point because it's going through the relationship.
And when you put, I've never used the create with nothing.
I mean, that just creates an empty object.
So, but it still gives it an ID, right?
Like at this point, I'd like post C would still have a user ID set.
Like that's the difference, right? Create and
Okay,
make
check
are
this out.
different because make doesn't give it an ID and create gives it an ID basically.
So if I run this, you'll see that I have a user ID on this. Right? I just dumped post C here.
Yeah. Okay.
So. And make will just not persist it. So if we look at, we'll look at exist, and that should be false. Well, and no, it'll be true at this point because it actually saved it here. If I were to have dumped this, it would not exist until the save gets called on it. So if you have an unpersistent model and then you save it through relationship, it turns into a persistent model because at that point it's been saved to the database. So going back to our lazy loading topic. So I've created a query count, set it to 0, and I'm just like listening to our database facade, and every time there's a query, it'll increment here, this line. And I'm using it with a reference with this ampersand, so that way we can see that query count will update outside of this function as well. Not function, but the callback. Then we're doing post get. So here is our 1, right? This is our +1 part of the query. And then here is our n, okay? All I'm doing is I'm just going to call this post user. All I have to do is call it. I don't have to set it to anything. I don't have to output it. Just calling the line is going to try to get the user from the post. And I'm going to assert that I have 6 queries that get run. Now, if you guys recall, I created 5 setup. So in my setup, I'm creating 5 posts here, and I'm tying them all to the user through this line here. So if we go back to lazy loading, I should have a total of 5 posts here, right? So let's just do this. Post, oops. 5, right? So that is our n part of this. Okay. Well, kind of. This is actually our +1 because this is my first fetch here, right? And then all I have to do is just access that relationship that's going to query out to get the user object. I just have to access it. I don't have to output it or anything. And then this is actually going to cause a query because we haven't loaded this relationship yet until we call it here. So I'm going to say that this loop is a size of 5. We have 5 items in this collection. And then I have my 1 here, so that should be 6. Does everybody follow that math? I guess more importantly you two guys because you haven't heard of this problem. Math makes sense to you? Mm-hmm. So if I run this test, I'll get 6. It passes. Make sense?
Yeah.
So now we have eager loading. And what this does is it says, hey, look, if you're not going to be looping over stuff, maybe you should go ahead and like query your relationships ahead of time. And you might do 3 or 4 or 5, maybe even 10 queries if you have 10 relations you want to access. But at least you're only doing 10 queries instead of, if you have 10 items, 10 queries each, that'd be 100, right? So we're doing this here. And the way to do that is with this with method. So you can say post with user, and then I'll say, hey, I'm going to look for the user relationship, and I'm going to run a query behind the scenes to grab that user for the set of posts that we have. And then we're going to go ahead and match those up later. Like this does all of this behind the scenes. I just say, hey, also preload me the user object. So I'm running the same code here. All I changed was with here. And then I have the same for each here, right? And I'm calling the post user the same way. I'm not doing anything different. But I have 2 queries now in my assert equals. And this passes. So this is the first query here. Or the get is 1 query. And then I have 1 relationship in the with. So the easier way to explain what's happening is it calls post get, and then it sees in this with method that it wants a relationship. So it kind of do like a select all from posts, and then it would say, okay, now that I have these posts, give me a list of those post IDs, and it would say select all from post where user ID n, and it would give it the set of IDs, and then it would marry them to the model behind the scenes. It would map them or whatever.
So it's not doing it via a join statement.
It's not a join. It's another select. Yeah, 100%.
That would be my concern. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Why is it a concern to deal with the joins?
Joins can get really expensive.
Yeah.
In fairness, selects are not always better.
If you got a large data set, you got to shove it on the memory.
Yeah, it just all depends. Yeah, it's I'm not a DBA, so I don't want to say which one's better. Like, there is no silver bullet here. It's like, this is better in this case, this is better in that case. Different things, but the important thing to note is that with this with method, and what we'll later talk about the load method, this does two different, one select statement per relation, and then you have the select for the get as well.
So can you run the lazy load again so we can, I'm wondering if there's a trade-off in memory or time?
So that's 18 megs of memory on that one. It may not be because this is such a small app.
It's better all the way around.
18 megs both ways.
Yeah.
But you have to remember, like, this, the 18 megs is probably just me spinning up the app and running it or whatever.
And the time is lower both ways, it looks like.
What do you mean? It can't be lower.
All around better. It looks like it's all around better.
What do you mean? It's 18 megs both ways. What's the time on the other one?
The time is
278 milliseconds.
329, 278. Well, the thing with like this kind of stuff is like 376, 298, 329. Yeah, because like if you run tests enough, like when you start looking at the milliseconds, like so many things affect this. It's like I would not measure like a 20 millisecond difference. Make that way is definitely faster because as you saw, we have a span of like an 80 millisecond difference just running the same test over and over again.
Just allocate down to your factory.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just comma 10,000.
Yeah, is that what you would do to get to benchmark? Like, what if somebody asked you to benchmark it?
Well, you would probably use a benchmarking tool against
Yes.
something like that, and then you want to run it again and again and again and again and again until you can get a good average.
So there are profilers for PHP. If you've used Xdebug, you can get like a Kcache grind file out of that. I am one of those don't optimize until you need to kind. There's a lot of arguments like, oh, use double quotes or use single quotes instead of double quotes if you're writing strings. Only use double quotes if you're using variables and all this. I do that just out of habit, so I know I'm getting literal characters with single quotes rather than accidentally interpolating a variable. I don't care about the performance hit of nanoseconds, literally nanoseconds of string creation.
I don't think anymore there is even a difference.
If you do it over enough, like 10 million iterations, there is.
Yeah.
It's measurable. It's measurable, not noticeable. Huge difference between these things. And again, it's over like 10 million iterations. I'm not a big fan of optimizing before you need to. Now, in this case, the same system at work. When Ethan was thinking about working with me, one of the things that we wanted him to work on was speeding up a login system because we had a lot of this lazy loading stuff, and we were doing 1,500 queries on one page. It was like, oh, this is pretty ridiculous. The load time was like 35 or 38 seconds. By the time Glenn had started, the load time was like a minute and a half or something, just ridiculous. And it got all the way up to 3 minutes before they told us, yeah, you guys should fix that. I'm like, I wanted to fix this a year ago, but thanks, guys.
So fix it at 20 seconds.
3 minutes to log in?
It took me 5 seconds to log in when I started January 2017. It was a 5-second login time. I'm like, how are you guys okay with this?
Right.
Like, and it got
It should be done.
when it got up to 30 seconds, my boss was like, okay, that's something that's like an easy enough fix we could give like a on-the-job interview type thing. So we gave it to Ethan, and he ended up deciding he didn't want to work with me again. So
I helped one.
no, you got almost all the way finished with that before you're like, okay, I don't want to work with you guys. He probably saw the code base and said, no way.
Well, I realized
How deep the problem went?
nasty the mid part was, and I was
Yeah.
like, eh.
So then Glenn started, and I was like, hey, that's a problem that still needs fixed, and it's an easy enough problem to fix. Let's throw it at Glenn. I'm like, thank God. And Glenn had already accepted an offer at that point, so he couldn't like run for the hills like this guy did when he saw this issue. So like this is all fixed through eager loading, right? When you have 1,500 queries, because you're loading too many entities, and this is just on one page, 1,500 queries. I know we had one page that was also loading like 6,000 queries, but that was only on one.
Wow.
Yeah. It's all because lazy loading. People did not think ahead of like, hey, I'm going to be looping over these 500 records and accessing 3 relationships each, or whatever. And I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. So
You probably started out small, right?
yeah.
All of a sudden, you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, it started out as again, when they built this, it was a 5-second login time. And I'm like, I don't understand how that was acceptable.
I don't either.
Yeah, but it's how it was. So we fixed that problem literally only with eager loading. Now, some of that took some finesse, as some of these relations were being loaded through other magic methods and stuff. But all we had to do is realize, okay, we would use that debug bar. Are you familiar with like Symfony has a debug bar, Laravel has the debug bar.
Very VD8.
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
So useful.
I just did this like DB listen thing with my app service provider, but everybody like Ethan and Glenn liked the debug bar. it doesn't really matter. As long as you see a query count, that's all that really matters. And so we would do that. We'd add the thing to our eager load just to like fetch it and be like, okay, our queries got cut in half, and we'd add another one and another one, another one. Eventually, our queries got down to like 20. And I'm like, hey, great, fantastic. Now our admin login is super fast. So with eager loading, you'll have, try to get back us on topic. So the get will be one query, the with will be another query, and it is a select. But it is some sort of, it's either a sub-select or like an ID and type select. And we can assert this again with our two.
As far as you can let Eloquent handle that, you don't have to think about it.
What do you mean?
I hate thinking about queries.
Like if you do like the with protected attribute?
You're like talking about what was selector joins and stuff earlier.
Oh.
Like, I could care less. I'm assuming the guy who put it together and thought about this.
Okay.
That's when you start digging through the code. What is it really doing? Or you just turn on debugging in your database and run it.
Right.
Yeah, so like the thing is, like I would do it this way. Like, okay, here's the obvious easy performance gain. And I would never touch this again until this thing is slow again. But I'm using eager loading. Why is it slow? Maybe I have to see the kind of query it's running now.
Right.
But that is so far down the road that you have to probably be like Facebook size or something for it to actually matter. Maybe not their size, but you have to be humongous. And at that point, if you have that problem, man, life's probably really good for you.
You hope, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe not invent your own version of PHP bake.
Huh?
Maybe not invent your own version of PHP bake.
Right, yeah.
So let me ask you this, though, because this is something I always wondered. When you talk about pulling back a bunch of records and making it go faster, right?
Mm-hmm.
One way, right, to optimize wouldn't that also be to limit the number of records you pull back? Like, let's say, like you were saying, right, you pull back 50 records,
mm-hmm.
and maybe that each one of those records has 3 sub-relations, you know? So that would give you, what, I don't know, 50, however many that is. But if you maybe
it'd be a total of
just
250 plus
10
10
back at a time, it would obviously be 5 times less or whatever, right?
Yeah, sure.
So is like, when would you choose to limit the record that you bring back versus do this?
Aggregates.
Yes.
Full database
That's
counts.
what you need to do with the data.
Yeah. Yeah. So the way I look at it is if I'm going to have one record of something, I'm never going to eager load the relationships and try to think ahead of what I need, because I'm going to end up doing the same amount of queries if I'm working with one object. Mm-hmm. So I'm either going to eager load it and do it up front before anything is displayed to the page, or I'll just have like, say I've got like a user profile, and I have like a user object that I pass to the profile, and then I need to have like say I have a profiles table, and I just have a profile per user. So that way I don't have like muddy up the users table with this profile data. Mm-hmm. So if I were to have the profile relationship, I wouldn't eager load that because I'm working with one user. And I'm going to do a query either way, whether I eager load the relationship or I lazy load it and just call it that one time. I'm still doing one query. It's just, when do I do it? Do I do it as soon as the controller passes data back to the view, or do I do it inside the view, even though it's abstracted away from the view kind of thing? It's still going to be a total of 2 queries, the user and the profile. So I wouldn't care. But if you know you're looping over data, unless it's a very small data set and it's not impactful, just go ahead and eager load it anyway, and it just won't be a problem for a very long time. And I don't ever like seeing triple-digit queries in the database unless I'm doing an aggregate operation or something. Like when Ethan and I worked together, we worked at a marketing like lead capturing agency. And yeah, some of those reports were hard, and they would have several queries, maybe not hundreds of queries.
Databases.
Huh?
All the database structures are
Yeah,
working with.
I mean, we were sending leads to anybody who'd buy them, right? But I mean, some of those aggregates were tough, and it would be like sub-selects and joins, and sometimes results from 4 different databases.
That was the fun part.
Yeah, and he got to deal with all that. Anytime I touch him, like, hey, you did this last time. You want to do this again?
No.
He's like, no. But yeah, so if I'm looping over a set of things, I try to keep it in my head to eager load the relations that I'm going to be using, just to keep the load on the database a little bit lighter. Again, if it's a small data set, you're not really going to notice it, unless your database is already like near max out CPU or something. So there's another way to lazy load to eager load relationships. Say you already have a collection of a thing, and you're like, hey, I'm about to loop over this, but I don't want to change. Say you're getting this collection from a place that's like used by 3 different places. Like, you did the whole dry thing, and you don't want to change it for all of the other places because maybe they don't need the eager loaded relations. So what you could do is you could have your post collection, and then you could just call load on it, and then give it the user relation, And it'll be like, okay, I can just go get the IDs from these posts and do another select where user ID in. And then when I run this, it hopefully will not run the queries. So if I do that, I'll get 2 again, and the test still passes. So I have 2 queries. This is one query, this guy, and then this down here is another query. And this, I think, makes it a little bit easier to see the 2 queries and the with and the get, because like one's get and one's load, so it makes a little more sense. But does this make sense how it's also only 2 queries instead of 6? Okay.
I'm not following.
Huh?
I'm not following.
Okay. So did you follow the with?
Yeah, I use with. I just didn't understand how
Okay.
performant things been. But
You didn't understand the what part?
I didn't understand the performance benefits, so that was awesome. But I don't understand load.
Okay, so load is eager loading after you already have a collection. So with means when you're getting a collection by doing your where,
Okay,
get.
I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
You do like with and then where then get. Or you could do, as long as you do your with before your get, you're fine. You can't call with afterwards though, because you get the collection.
They must do some like combining, right? Like because it has the one query or the post.
Yeah, it does it all
And then
behind the scenes. I don't know exactly how.
all
I
the
haven't looked at it.
users in one
Yeah.
one query, and then
It gets the post in one query, it gets a list of all the needed users in another query, and it just maps them up to the models.
Right.
Yeah.
So with load, if you had some awful reason to split up your lazy loading, to do something on post before you actually got any of that, you could use load instead of with and put all that logic between.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you had something like
maybe you'll
do
never
some,
get to it. So like hopefully you don't have to load it. Right?
Perhaps the parameter of that function is the collection post. So you're actually passing in the collection.
well, in this case it'd be the user ID or the user relation because we're on the post collection.
Right.
Yeah. So like what Harry was saying, if we have a post collection and want to do something, what was that even?
That part's strange to me too. Like you're getting a collection and then load.
Yeah, load is on a collection, on an Eloquent collection,
Right,
not
so it's
on
an
a
Eloquent
regular collection.
Right.
Which the Eloquent collection extends the regular collection, but it also gives you some Eloquent goodies like load.
Like load.
Right, so if you don't want to get in trouble, right, in your use statement at the top,
Mm-hmm.
do you just put eliminate support collection all the time, or do you?
Oh, I don't need that. This post get just gives me a collection, an
No,
Eloquent
let's say-
collection.
Let's say you had to use a collection, right? Because like I was referring to getting confused between the 2 types of wheres and sometimes there's a collection that comes back from Eloquent and it's a different class than what comes back from.
Absolutely.
Like a tell
One is an Illuminate Eloquent collection, and one's Illuminate Support collection.
Right. So how do you do you ever get mixed up when or do you just always put Illuminate?
You hope for the best
support?
one in your
Because if you
IDE.
just put support on there, it'll always I'm talking about what do you put in that use statement
Well, so-
where you're bringing in all your files,
So
What do
just
put
because
in?
you import the support collection, and say you were to type into method and say, I want this to be a regular collection. So you do like use Illuminate Support collection, and you're to just have a function and you type into it with collection. And that would be an Illuminate Support collection. Because Eloquent collection extends the support collection object, that'll still be just
That's what I'm
fine.
saying. It's not going to break. So just to be on the safe side, just use the parent collection class.
Yeah, but that wouldn't always tell you if you had a regular collection or an Eloquent
right.
collection.
But it also wouldn't, your IDE was not going to tell you loads available.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is a very important thing to remember.
Yeah, I don't.
And-
I use VI like him.
No, dude, there's all sorts of cool stuff here. As long as I'm let's make sure I don't.
I keep hoping to take my way through the thing.
I like my IDE.
That was something that also confused me.
I'm fast.
If you guys see here, I still have the method.
How did you get that?
There's a PHP actor plugin I have, and it's supposed to be like a refactoring tool, so it'll tell you like it's like I assume you're using PHP Storm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll do type inference type stuff like PHP Storm. PHP actor does. It uses Microsoft's parser that VS Code uses, the tolerant parser.
That's good.
So like what Harry was saying, say we wanted to get some collections, and we didn't necessarily want the user object maybe to save some memory or something. We could do some stuff in between these steps to the post collection, and then afterwards we could load the user and then output it in a page or something with a loop. But the important part here is we still get this test passing that it equals 2 queries here is the important part.
I think load is also good. If you need to go get a far relation, you can put dots on that user, right?
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
There are
That's
nested.
a cool way to use
There are
load.
nested eager loading. That is, I will talk about. I just didn't want to keep that in this talk. I didn't want to diverge too far. So now I'm going to run another test. Since Tarek and Harry have the most questions about this, I want one of you guys to answer this. How many queries test here? So I have my DB listen, and then I'm just calling my post get. So I should have 5 posts, right? And then I'm going to call this load user. And then I'm going to call this for each, and I'm going to do this user thing down here. And then I'm going to assert not equals 2. This test will pass, okay, if you just trust me here. How many queries will I have?
Okay, you said you had 5 posts?
5 posts.
I would have guessed 2, but that's not the answer.
Do you know this? Okay.
Yeah, you think you're tricky.
I'm not thinking I'm tricky. This is a important thing to know.
Kind of a theme.
Well, it's if you understand these questions, then you won't have these problems.
Or 7?
It's not 3. The fact they're using Query Builder, I'm guessing it's going to do the query again.
What'd you say?
Since you're using Query Builder, I guess it's not on the collection, it's making queries again?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Okay. So I don't feel like doing the mental math. I guess Harry did it. It would be probably
7.
Yeah.
So you're doing your one query to get your posts. You're doing another query to eager load your posts, right? Which in this case is kind of silly, but I actually have seen code like this,
That's
by the
something I
way.
would have done, probably.
The inside the well, you actually have done because I've corrected you when you asked me how to do something. I'm like, hey, you're doing this in a bad way.
Yeah,
Not that it was
Query Builder a lot.
yeah, because that's just what you were used to doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then inside of our for each, we're accessing the user relationship method rather than the relationship instance variable, if you will. And then that is a query builder object. And then we have to call first, which is just getting us the first thing returned from a query. So we are doing 5 queries inside the for each, plus the load, plus the get. So it's a total of 7. So just to make sure we're not idiots here. Two assertions, great. Make sense?
So on the for each, you're getting that first is referring to the first user, right? Not the first post.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So
And that user has 5 posts. Is that
Well,
what you said? 5.
it does, but we're not going that way. What we're saying is in this for each here, we're saying for every post I have, and then I'm not actually doing anything in this variable, I'm just making it so it resolves. But we're taking the post object we have, and then we're calling the user method, which is we've established is different than the user instance variable. And so at this point in time, this user is a relationship object, which is also a query builder object. So we can call where if we want, or order by, or any of the like database abstractions that the Laravel has given us with the query builder. And then we're calling first. I could also call get, and we'd still have 7 queries here. It doesn't matter. But with a belongs to or a has one relationship, it does a first instead of a get, so you don't have to unpack it yourself from the collection. So I did first here, but this test would still pass if I change this to get. Yeah, or count. Right? Because all it's doing is saying, run this query every time I'm in this for each, and we have 5 posts. So we have 5 of those queries plus our load plus our get. Make sense? Okay. So this pretty much wraps up our talk, and here's where I talked about this eager loading with and load, and then nested eager loading is the dot notation that David just talked about. So if we had a nested relationship, I guess I'll go back to my work app. We have this concept of a job, and each job has mail tracking records, and they're just mail pieces that go out like a mailing list. And then each mail tracking record has a mail tracking queue as well. Say I wanted to look at my mail tracking queue or preload my mail tracking queue, I could do job : with, and then you could do like mail tracking dot mail tracking queue, and it would preload all of the mail tracking queues. But because it's a nested one, it also preloads all of my mail tracking ones. So it's actually just 2 queries there, even though it's separated by this. It's one string, but it's dot separated, so it will give me the. There are other ways to nest it. I didn't want to get too far into nested eager loading, but it's a thing that we can.
What about relationship constraints?
I already did that. You mean like the conditional relations?
Like scopes?
Not that far. I was just thinking you said you want to load a certain
amount of
set
things?
of relations.
Like a where? Like a where?
Yeah.
Like a where?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did like recent posts is what I did. Is what I did for that.
Oh, I meant with.
Oh, I was trying not to get too far.
Well,
Yeah.
I feel like you touched base on the next part of it.
So another good one, if we were to do count, like this other David said, the far end of the table, David, he said we could do count and it would still run another query. Laravel gives us this nice little abstraction called with count, and you give it the relationship name, and then you can use this magic property post count, and it will assign that for you, and then that'll again preload the count for you, so you're not again in some sort of n+1 query situation. And that's the most of this talk, and that's right around an hour. Awesome. And we have these other advanced features that I didn't touch because it would make this talk way too long. So polymorphic relations is one of those. Apparently Ethan wanted to hear about that. Sorry, you guys won't be here for that one. And then we have has and where has and has many through. These are various like conditional things you can do on your query to like, I want to have some sort of condition to like load related models of kind of like what Ethan was talking about. I think you're thinking of has, not with. So like has is like a condition set. I only want the posts that have a certain count or that have a certain relation or something of that nature.
I was thinking like custom query in the relationship.
I think, what are you thinking of this? Not models. Like this?
I guess, say if you wanted, I mean, that's kind of a
Simple example?
I mean, I guess, say if you didn't reuse it more than once, you wouldn't have to make it a method. Say you wanted
No,
to
but I would, just to abstract it away and make it obvious what's
like
happening.
you could pass, so say you use with,
Mhm.
you can set it as an array and have the key be the relationship and then the value be a function callback that modifies the query.
Yeah.
I guess that's kind of a way to do it too.
There's also a when you can do. Like a when is like a conditional
Right.
query operation. I was trying to, not get too far into this. So we have query scopes. David just touched on that. I'm a huge fan of those, but again, that's a talk for another time. But query scopes basically let you, I'm going to use that fancy word, encapsulate some logic of like conditions or even selects. You can put any query method inside a query scope and just give that scope a name. It'll be a little more obvious like what you're doing in terms of like reading the code. Nested eager loading, which we talked about, there are several ways to accomplish that. Updating parent timestamps, accessors, mutators are other eloquent things we could go over in another talk. And then casts and dates is another one that a lot of people probably don't utilize, which are really fun. So that's our talk. Does anybody have any questions? What about the chat, Glenn? Has anybody said anything in chat? Great. Well, I mean, it's
How many people are on the chat?
There's a 10-second lag or 15 or something. How many people, Glenn?
Well, just really the one person.
Okay.
Something else.
Probably the guy who wanted us to set this up for him, so we could mention this. Shout out to his name, Ravi, I think his name is. Shout out to him if for watching this and if everything made sense. And if anything didn't make sense, please speak up, as I think we're mostly wrapped up. Anybody have any questions, comments? Want to do some cool stuff in
I
the
think his
code?
mic doesn't work. Didn't he say that?
No, he doesn't. He's not going. Like, I'm on a YouTube live stream. I'm not on a Hangouts.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah.
Show us your code.
Well, cool thing is on GitHub, and I'll post it to our meetup. Everything's on GitHub. I'll go ahead and like unfull screen this now, so that we. There we go. And so everything's. I created a Tampa Bay Laravel organization, and we have the Eloquent Relationships repo. And if you want to look at the user model, this is pretty simple. I just did this fillable. This was already given to us. This user model is in 5.6. I'm not sure about 5.5, but I know in 5.6 because I created this last night. The 5.6 code will automatically give you the user model with some of the stuff set out. You don't have to do the make auth anymore. This just gives you the user migration and some of the other stuff. And then we have our post relationship, which is pretty straightforward. Has many post class. Then we have recent posts, which we just put a where on it. We don't even do the get. Notice how the get from this is missing. That's an important key from this, because the get would return a collection object, not a relationship object. And then we could look at our post model as well. And this is pretty simple. I just set guarded to empty. Now, the comment on here, we don't actually want to do this in production, because this lets you set any column name that you want. If you pass it into like a new post and put in like Harry super awesome lead column, but that column doesn't exist in the database, it's going to error out on you with an SQL error for unknown column or whatever. So I like to fill out my fillable array and say, here's a whitelist of things you can fill out when you create a new object. And then that's only like, you can pass it 30 fields, even if you only have 10 in the thing, but it won't error out on you because like only the whitelisted ones will get saved. So obviously you have to not put in bad stuff in the whitelist.
I think doing accessors for that, is that okay? Like
Accessors wouldn't.
what I'm saying is we're not mutators. I mean,
Yeah.
So if I want to basically make let somebody put in a field like I don't know company name, and company name's not in the table, right? It's not even in the table, but I want to let them put it in. I'll make one of those mutators, right?
You could do that, yeah.
Set it,
yeah.
And basically this doesn't go anywhere in the database. Even if you save the model, it just goes away, right? Whatever it does, whatever.
I guess you could.
Do, you know.
Maybe. I have not tried to use a mutator with an unfound column.
Yeah, I mean
that seems risky.
Full name.
No, that's an accessor, not a mutator. There's a difference. Accessor is where you read from, and mutator is where you set. So mutator, you do like this. Point of a mutator is to change the thing they're trying to save it to. So if you do like this, user full name equals, you'd have to split the full name into like a first name and a last name.
I have first name, last name in the database, and then
there's an accessor for full name.
Right.
That's what I mean.
So you would probably do something like, let's go back to user just to make this make sense. You'd probably do something like, let's get this to the middle. I did not want to cover accessors, but since it seems like we're okay with still going here. So get full name attribute, right? And then we could do something like return foo, and you'll just always get foo here, right? So, and the way you'd access this is something like user full name, whoops, or I'm not a huge fan of it allowing both case sensitivities here, but they both work. You what?
I didn't think the first one.
I thought the
I
second
use
one
the
was-
first one
I
all the
use the
time.
second one.
Yeah, people change it, and I actually have a way in which I like to use these. And Glenn and I have gotten into a couple debates about this.
Huh.
I like to use my accessors as camel case, and I like to let my snake case stuff be actual column
Like
names.
that.
Yeah, see, because then you always know where to look for it.
Yeah, and you're like, wait, this is a magic column.
Boom. Yeah.
What about do you guys use helper function?
Yeah, absolutely, all the time, all the
I'm talking
time.
about global helper function.
Yeah, sure.
So do you use underscores in those names to differentiate them from other ones? Some people do that. I don't know if that's good practice either.
Yeah, so this is kind of, I guess, like a double standard of mine. I try to leave the underscores in the global helpers that we've created, so it looks a little more natural. Like it's either a Laravel helper or it's a PHP function, which goes against what I just said, right?
Well, yeah, but these are like properties. Those are methods.
Yeah. So you still have to look in 3 places for that helper. But in all fairness, if you go to whatever version of docs you have and you want to see like string elite replace or something, and you're like, oh, I'll go to the Laravel docs, I don't see it. You can rest assured it's somewhere in your own helpers definition somewhere. But again, it's maybe I should change my mind on that because
No.
I
love that.
No. This I keep. I mean, like if I have like
the helpers.
like stir foo replace versus stir foo replace. Well, function, not method. But
Function.
like these two, I always do it on the right side, but maybe I should start doing it on the left
weird
side.
to me.
I mean, it
if I
does.
saw that in your code, I would go like,
Huh?
I do the left.
I mean, I should. I really should. What's
but
up,
the
dude?
left. If I saw that like on the left in your code, I'd be like, oh, that's a
Custom
code.
That's what I'm saying.
And if
Maybe
I saw the one on the right, I'd be like, maybe I have to go into the helper file or
that could be your own helpers.
PHP.
That could be a Laravel helper, which Laravel has 2 sets of helpers, by the way. And then there's or it could be like maybe I should start doing this one on the left. I think I should. That was not hard to
It would
convince
make
me.
it easier to figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately,
The
I.
left one's easier to type.
Is
It is. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It just looks so weird to me.
I mean, it does, but it lets you know exactly where to look for it. And I also type with that. I put repulse. Whoops. But yeah, so with my accessors, I definitely like doing the way on the left because it makes it very clear to me where to look for it. Glenn, I think, likes the idea of it looking like a column name, so it looks a little more natural. I understand that, but I care a lot more about the overhead of like modifying this thing rather than like how it looks where it's written. I don't know if we'll ever come to agreement on that. We're both kind of set in our ways, and we both just kind of whatever makes it through our code review is kind of what sticks.
And both cases work all the way down to 5.2?
I mean, yes, definitely in 5.2, and I'm pretty sure they work all the way down to 5.4. But if you want, I can keep this full name attribute, and then I can just call it in a test, and you can make sure the test doesn't blow up.
I could try it.
Yeah, let's just do
You're
it.
running 5.6 in this?
This is 5.6. I do have a 5.2 app if you want, but I have to switch my PHP version real quick.
Yeah, not a big deal.
Yeah. So I'll do this.
7.2 right there.
Yeah, I'm running 7.2 right now.
Oh.
But if I were to go to my 5.2 app, I'd have to switch to my 5.6. Because I know that our app in 5.2 does not work in PHP 7. I know that from the hard way.
It's not a Laravel issue, right?
It's our
The
app didn't have test written, and yeah. We'll just do that just to keep people happy. Actually, I'm going to do this on parens, and we'll just do a user full name. And if I get an exception here, it'll complain at me. And then we'll just do user full name. No test happened, so maybe I could just like assert true. Yeah. So both of those still work. Or actually, what I could do is this. I actually have like a good assertion.
Right.
This is uneven right here, and it's making typing really difficult.
This is, how does it know? Because, wait, you're
It's another magic method thing.
Right. It's looking for a function name. If it doesn't exist, look for another function name.
So I'm pretty sure what actually happens. We could go look if we really want to go dig. But I think what happens is it takes the property here, and it camel cases the snake case string. But in this case, I don't have a snake case string. It's already camel case, so it's happy. And it prepends, and it does like, I think it does something like this.
So in theory,
Method equals
camel case
UC
would be
first.
more efficient.
In theory, yeah.
By one call.
Yeah. In theory, UC first, foo, right? And then do something like method equals stir, some sort of snake case thing. There's a helper for this. I'm just gonna do this.
Right.
Camel from snake foo. And then probably something like method equals get dot method dot attribute. I'm guessing it does some form of this, whether it's doing through sprintf or whatever. Some form of this, what I had to guess. We could look and find out, but if you do this, it's that idempotent, I think is a word where like you always get the same result no matter what kind of thing. If you do this, if you do camel case or snake case, it's going to be the same result either way, so it doesn't matter how you name it.
Right.
So, but if we run this test, boom, it passes. So both of these work. And they both return foo, which is what we're returning out of this guy.
So it's the same and it's not equal.
Assert same, asserts the type is the same as well. It's triple and double equals.
And just before you go to your next job, you can make every other accessor different.
Yeah. So if we run this and our test fails, because I changed the foo to foo 2, just to prove that our test wasn't doing anything unexpected.
Like open
Yeah.
the ag line.
Yeah. So mutators is kind of the same thing. You do set something attribute, and then you would do this attributes, and you'd pass the key name and set it to whatever you wanted. So I did this one time for a password. I don't know if Ethan remembers this. So I had an accessor for a password. I'm like, hey, if somebody gives me a plain text password, I'm going to make a mutator to like run like bcrypt on it before I set it. And I didn't check it first to see if it was already hashed, like with like the $2 $Y thing.
We couldn't log in.
No, I could. But it's like the minute you need, like, forget your password and you need to create a new user, you couldn't log in. So then, like, this got really bad because I was doing this really lazy and I wasn't writing tests. Shame on me, I know.
Well, you wanted to.
I did, yeah.
In defense.
But I at that point in time, I did not stand as firm against I refuse to not write tests. Now I refuse to not write tests. I just don't care. You can fire me. What are we gonna? What'd you get fired for? Not writing tests.
You get the tattoo. I refuse not to write tests.
On your neck.
On my forehead.
On your neck.
Forehead.
That way you don't have to answer the question in job interviews.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I noticed when you had your test, I noticed you didn't follow the convention that I see in a lot of the blogs and everything where they actually write it out, the sentence of the thing.
That was only because I was wanting to get stuff that was accessible,
So
like
is it-
easily up there.
Is there a reason why they do that? It seems to me kind of redundant. Like to write it, it changes the person's name instead of just writing change name.
Because, I mean, you get more context. The more verbose your test sentence or paragraph sometimes, the more verbose it is, the more context you get.
So I don't know, but my question is, like I get that argument, right? Because they're saying 6 months later, 7 months later, you want to come back to your code and go, what the hell, you know?
Yeah.
Q, R, Y, Z, you know, what the hell does that mean? But okay, so, but is there some reason that, like, is there some tool that uses that? Like BTAT or something that you...
When running tests in like PHP Storm, whenever you see the list of like, you know, green or red, I think is when it's, when you run all your tests, you get the list of them, and the name for each one of the tests that shows up is actually that method name.
Right.
Like a nice pretty sentence, right?
Yeah, so you get, well, no, it doesn't break it down, it's still a camel case, but at least then you get a description of everything. So
or snake case if you do snake case method names.
Yeah, so it will show you the exact same thing, but at least that way you can look and see the full list of your tests, and you can click on them and see the results. And if you put a var down for PD, you'd be able to click on them and see.
Right, but I'm saying, like, let's say like he could write his test, and his test name would
Does
be
what?
It changes, it underscore changes underscore the underscore person.
No, I think you're thinking of
name, right?
BHAT or PHP spec.
And then I could write my test, and I could say change name, change.
Yeah, because it uses
right?
one of those two as
I
well
was
as
just
PHP.
wondering,
It abstracts
like,
stuff on top of
there's
PHP.
a whole
Because it'll do like describe
people
and
who,
it
are
syntax, right?
Have to write your test like this. They
No,
have to have
that is-
like they have to be like.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why?
And you're like, you'll do describe and it's a function name and you pass a string in there of the long ass string you want it to say instead of like a long function name. BHAT, no. I wanted to play with it because it's an acceptance testing based framework, so you could use Gherkin
I
with
think
it.
it's good to have
Our
that
lives is always
for
doesn't
you,
it?
and if you
I mean, it's just PHP unit, that's all.
just make sure that it's clear no matter what convention you use.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it just, it's a HTTP endpoint testing.
Crooks, they like to use their test as document.
Yeah, I mean, or it'll load the view of, it doesn't have to
That's
be
the main
API.
thing.
I'll show you, stick around and I'll
To
show
me,
you.
it's like, hey man, this is
You
a
can mock if you
computer.
want, but you don't have to.
You're programming a computer.
Request.
You know, you don't
No,
need
it's a real
to
one.
put it in front
It-
of everything you do.
I mean, it runs your
Unless
controller
there's
code.
some reason that you would do it, like there's some
It builds
interface,
it.
some
Yes,
DevOps
yes,
connection, or some deployment.
It just knows how to build it through the
that picks
application.
that up
It, like,
for some reason.
has
But it runs your controller code, it runs the actual request that happens, it runs like if you have a custom form request. Like all that stuff we did.
From point one browser to
Yeah, I'm like,
Yeah.
it's
If you
always, it seems
if you
to be
remember what
redundant,
the last
you
one
know?
we did, the
That's everything that's
refactor,
programmed.
all of those were
Get rid of
HTTP
it.
tests because I was doing like this post, like the post method, and I would give it like a
that was an
URL.
actual like request.
HTTP request.
Yeah.
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 Now it's not quite the same because I'm actually doing it from a
I never
browser,
used
but I mean
it.
it's as close as you can get without being in a
Really
browser.
Matt or the other ones
We'll
that are,
test
you know,
like
I don't even
browser
use
nuances and shit.
what's the orchestral?
I'm not sure what that is.
What's what?
Instead of using PHP unit, you can use orchestral if you want to test inside of a package. So I really haven't used that much, but we were just talking about, you know, why did they come up with a convention of writing the whole
Wow,
test?
right there.
Well, you've been working on this for months now.
Well, this is also from September. I should have chosen a different one. Let's do a different one. Let's do December or
Yeah, let's
something.
see the newest one.
Yeah. Do I have a January? There's December. I know I have
Always got a
one.
before glide folder. Track your progress going.
Oh no, because like once we added him, dude, our testing percentage, pow, dude, I'm dead serious. It more than doubled what
that like
it was.
Oh, we're on a race for it. That's what he was doing.
BC.
No, we talk about this all the time. I'm like, dude, the fact that I just had somebody else who could write tests with their stuff while I'm all constantly getting pulled away to like fix like dumb stuff all the time. It's like the fact that we have a rate of like always adding tests, dude. It was so fast. Like I had less than 100 tests written by the time he started, and we were at 200 tests by the end of October. So from June to September, I had less than 100, and then from September to October, we had more than 200. So he more than doubled the rate at which tests were getting written. It was awesome. What was meetup? That's what I want.
It's the word tree going into the code base and then testing it.
Yeah. So there's a lot more green here. Okay.
Starting from what existed.
It was a nightmare. Yeah.
That's what sucks.
Look at all. There's a lot more green here. How do you like that?
Nice.
Yeah.
It's, you know,
So,
orange.
Is
So-
this did you write this, or is this some?
This is like with PHP Unit, you can do a code coverage analysis, and it's kind of a risky game to get involved with because you start chasing
Too,
them.
right?
Huh?
You have to have XDebug too.
Yeah, you have to XDebug installed and enabled in your PHP INI, otherwise you can't do this. But this is a
But did you make this like out of did you make this?
no PHP Unit just does this for you.
Really?
There's an option to do code
Pretty solid,
coverage.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Shocked me too when I saw it. I was like, really? Not the same damn thing.
So this is a risky game to get into like I want 100% coverage because just because a function runs all of the lines in a test doesn't mean you assert it against all of its behavior. So I don't want to get into the argument, but it's a risky case to be in. But see how I have all these green lines here, like if not null, all this stuff here, and this will tell you. This is kind of what Harry was telling you about the function names here, right? This will tell you the class and the function name. I can't move my mouse, so I'll point with my hand. So I move my mouse, this will go away. But this is the class here. This test file, this test class here, mailingless test, runs this function. Incorrect zip column will not be found. So I know that's the function name to find where this line of code up here gets read, line 133, where my cursor is. Oh, here, 133. So I know that this test and this test. So this is the feature test. I was just telling you about these, right? This runs a HTTP almost the equivalent of a full HTTP request. It spins up the Laravel app on its own and like knows how to handle it. But you get a real request object with the form request and everything else. So this feature test, it will actually do like I call it this post, do like a post method, and I give it an array of data to post to the server, and it'll run the whole controller code and everything. So I know that this thing, partner cannot configure mailing without a zip code header. So that test will run this line of code here, and then this test is from my unit level test will run it as well. I have some tests in here where I've got like 12 things that run one line of code because like it might be the first line like a controller method, and I have 12 different scenarios that cover.
So that runs through the validation everything then? Or does it skip to validation?
Yeah, no, it does validation. So if you have like there's a couple different ways to do validation. Like the way I prefer to do it now is with form request, and there's a rules attribute or a rules method, and you just give it like an array of rules like you would do when you do a validate or make or whatever.
Right.
Or like, and if you do that form request validation, if it's invalid, you never make that controller method. It throws an exception before it gets there, and you have to handle it, right? If you don't do it that way, you do like rules equals, do an array of rules, and you like validate or make or whatever. Like the controller code still happens. So if you have a validation exception in your form request, it still kicks out and it still says, hey, this happened, or like this runs your whole, whatever your controller code is set up to look like, it runs and it returns a response. So I also have a thing that a buddy of mine called smoke tests. Now I feel really official standing up. I'm going to sit back down. My buddy calls these smoke tests, and I did these just out of like making sure my page renders, but I kind of like the cool name smoke tests. And what I'll do is sometimes I'll just do like a whatever type of user, like a logged in user can access whatever page. And I'm only doing that, and I'm just asserting that I get a 200 response. And that seems a little useless maybe.
Not if you've broken something in the app.
Boom! Right?
I've done that.
Yes.
I have done that.
Yeah, there are several times
That's the worst feeling in the world.
I'll be like, hey, well, my
when you just push to production.
Yeah. So what do you use to run do you use Dusk to run this feature?
No, you can. I said that a little too passionately. Dusk is awesome. Dusk, I love Dusk. And there's a really cool, I'll see if Glenn can find the link for you. There's a guy who actually uses Dusk to automatically pay one of his bills with a website that doesn't have an auto pay set up.
Yeah, right.
So I think that's hilarious. But Dusk is great, but I can't use it at work because we're on 5.2. So I'm a little bummed. But Dusk is awesome because it will run a headless browser and it will run JavaScript for you.
It's not too fun configuring that, let me tell you.
Well, configuring on CI sucks, but configuring it locally is awesome. So the 5.5 Laravel actually comes with a different version of the WebDriver, which works a lot better for CI tools and whatnot on servers like headless servers.
Do you use a CI server?
At work? No, I've been on that argument for about 7 months now.
I just played with Circle CI a little bit. That's pretty cool.
Well, I thought that Circle CI had like a lot of build minutes for like what seemed like a lot of minutes for free, but it's like 1,500 I think build minutes.
They're all expensive.
Oh, all the CIs are expensive. But I thought 1,500. I was like, man, that's a lot of minutes. Like, how many hours is that, right? Come to find out, like, when you start looking at it, because it runs on every commit, not just on a pull request. It runs every commit.
How it goes real quick.
And if you want to start running like code coverage on every commit, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, I know that this code coverage that just ran in our last meetup that we had, so in January. I know that took 28 minutes to run that because I put my computer down and went and watched a TV show while it ran. So I'm like, okay, so if every commit takes 28 minutes, I'm going to run through 1,500 minutes really fast.
You could pretty much hire somebody to run your DevOps for that, for whatever it costs you.
I mean, it's once you get your YAML file, or depending on what CI service you use, what file you have. Once you get that set up for the most part, it's not too bad. But when you start getting infrastructures like what Ethan likes to play with AWS and stuff, he could probably make a job out of that. He likes it. One of the guys who's not here today, another David, actually, he just got one of his AWS certifications, and he's really big into that. So next time he's here, you could probably ask him about a lot of that stuff.
of stuff that they do, I guess, as well.
Must be a David thing.
Maybe it is.
But this function name here, like trying to get back full circle, this is the same format I think Harry was saying the PHP Storm will give you. Maybe not the class name in front, but at least the function name, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which having that in my editor would be pretty handy sometimes, if you need to go back and like, what test is this going to affect, kind of thing.
So like for a class, typically whenever something breaks, maybe it's just the way that I develop, but it'll be like green, 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 and then like everything after that is for like a specific model.
So does PHP Units just run these tests for you like periodically or what?
Well, no, you use you just call them directly. So if you're working on inside of a test class, you can right-click on the method name of the class itself and click Run. And if it's not configured, you can just tell it to look inside of the vector folder for the autoload file, and it'll grab a PHP unit from there. And then it just runs it and gives you all the results and everything in a nice little window at the bottom.
Okay, so you still have to tell it to run every time though?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do run on save too, can you?
I haven't done
I feel like there's a keybind that we discussed
Yeah, you
maybe.
do that too, probably.
it. There's a lot of features that I don't use.
Yeah,
There's a shit ton of features.
I'm really partial to the Vim plugin I have for testing because it lets me stay outside of my test but rerun the last test I ran. So if you do the whole test first dogmatic thing, then you write your test and of course it's going to fail, but then you just you add your route, then you go add your controller, then you never have to go back to your test file until the very end when you want to add a function to the test or something of that nature, which I like that a lot. But otherwise, if I had to switch back to my test every time, it wouldn't be any different. Adam Wathen, a pretty big Laravel community name, he has a Sublime package to depending on where you click inside your test, it'll run the method or the class. And somebody has a recent thing for where you click, it's like a control click or something, right? Somebody has one for that for PHP Storm. Then there's this keybind that I know you can do. Harry and I discussed it. I don't remember what it's going to use PHP Storm, but there's a way you can do that way. VS Code I think has a package for it now. But the easier you can make running your tests, the more likely people are to run
how
it.
much is test? I have my Vim set up 2 test screen code. So every time I write code, I always have my test on the left-hand side and my code on the right. And I mean, it seems to work for me, but what's the disadvantage of that?
Well, the fact that you still have to switch over. Yeah, you just have to switch over. As long as I'm running the same test I last ran, I never have to switch what file I'm in ever.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, that's just it's a little benefit that you don't care that you have until you have and you don't have it anymore. It's like a smartphone. Nobody needed one until they had one, right? It's the same thing. But I'm really I guess just snooty about productivity hacks. I think I was telling you this when we met.
Yeah.
I just every tiny little thing I can shave a second here.
I use that CI keystroke.
Change inside. Yeah. That was awesome. Yeah, because you can use T for tag. That's the awesome one because you can change inside HTML tag, an outer tag or an inner. There's all sorts of.
Get to that.
If you guys want to ever learn Vim, the secret to this is not doing it on your own. This Vim tutor thing, several people say, play Vim tutor for a week, and then do there's a harder game you can do, or play Vim tutor for. They give you different amounts of time depending on which blog article you read. It's do a Vim tutor for some amount of time, and then here's this harder to play Vim game that's still not quite as hard as writing code. And it's after you've done this, you'll only lose this much productivity instead of this much productivity, and it's it makes it easier to transition sort of thing. I'm of the firm opinion, because maybe it's because it's what worked for me, but I was forced into learning Vim by a friend of mine. He was hey, when we pair up, we have to do it on the server anyway, so we're going to use Vim or we're going to use Nano. And I refused to use Nano, so you're going to have to learn how to use Vim. I'm or you can just drive and I'll be the thinker and you'll always... And he goes, I'm not always driving, no way. So he's I'll tell you what you need to do. And we did this once or twice a week for about an hour at a time. Because it was a website community thing we were both maintaining, and there was a lot of work we had to get done. So we were once or twice a week for about 3 or 4 months. And this is actually when I was working with Ethan a little over a year ago. And one day, one of our coworkers was James, just switch. You're all my whole computer setup is all about not touching the mouse. And so many people in the office are why don't you use Vim? And I'm man, it's hard. It's hard, right? And I just made the switch, and I didn't lose any productivity from doing it once or twice a week for about an hour. For about 4 or 5 weeks, maybe it was 6 weeks, but still, for even if it was 2 months, just doing it in your spare time for 1 hour, 2 different times a week, for 8 weeks, that's not a lot of time lost. It's a frustrating time lost, don't get me wrong, because you're like, how do I do this thing? But it stuck pretty well, a lot better than I realized it would. But I think part of like persevering, you're working with somebody who knows how to use Vim, and they're like, hey, don't freak out. Like, yeah, this sucks. You change the whole file a whole bunch because you hit like 4 keys and it's all magic, but you hit undo a couple times and everything's fine. Vim has a really cool undo history, actually, where it like branches things out. And there's a graphical plugin for it I have where it shows like the tree of undos. That's really cool that you can do. But if you guys want to learn Vim, I'll happily pair it. I'm always hassling Harry about it.
Yeah, I would volunteer too. I've been using it for 30 years, and if anyone wants to really learn it, I'd be happy to pair up. I work out of the house like you do, and I definitely would offer up to pair program because I don't get enough FaceTime with other people.
Pairing's fun.
I've only touched Vim on production servers when it's somebody else's machine and they don't run Nano.
Yeah, but see, then it's easy to screw things up.
It is.
But I'm always looking up. Is this the right command? To say
never be without it.
But if you just learned Vim and you daily drove on. Now, the thing is, for people who really love the PHP Storm feature set, like I know Harry loves a lot of things about PHP Storm, you're going to have to get a lot of plugins for Vim to even remotely think it's close to PHP Storm. And you're going to have to really pimp it out.
Can't you
is it worth it?
Use Vim in PHP Storm?
Well, there is a Vim mode. Not everything is supported, but most of the important stuff is. Yeah.
What's the other one? There's another one that begins with an S.
Sublime?
Sublime, right.
They called it vintage mode, but then because vintage mode kind of sucks, somebody created a vintageous plugin.
Sublime is kind of not popular anymore, right?
I mean, it is.
A lot of people moved on to VS Code because Microsoft made something great for once.
Right.
That and the service book.
So, and brackets? Nobody uses brackets anymore?
I've never heard of people using brackets.
Brackets was kind of heavy to me.
Did you?
Brackets started to become abandoned after Atom came out. Everybody's like, "Oh wow, Adam's great. Let's all hop on that." And then I thought Atom was going to be the big thing until VS Code came out, and people started using it and just started loving it.
Is VS Code free?
Yeah, totally free.
What gets me about it is they're both Electron apps, but people are flocking to VS Code for some reason.
VS Code is really performant for an Electron app.
Really?
Yeah.
You know what I hate about Electron? Maybe it's just Slack. But my battery on this laptop is phenomenal. I'll get 10 or 13 hours out of a full charge until I open Slack, and then I watch it drop by 3 hours.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, it drives me nuts. But I can work, and I've done it, Glenn will test this, I can work a full day in the office without plugging in my laptop. I'll get full 8 hours with Slack open, and most of the people in this room can confirm I Slack almost all day, every day. So
I'm surprised you get anything done.
I mean, I feel like I should have had a highest ever week in productivity last week, but we had some QA issues. People didn't want to QA until 5 p.m. on Friday. So I was a little salty about that. But I feel like the productivity spurts, I think, can be beneficial. Like, you stop talking for an hour and write a bunch of cool shit, and then you talk for 10, 15, 20 minutes. Then you stop and write a bunch of cool shit.
Perspective.
Yeah. It's I don't intentionally try to do the Pomodoro technique or whatever, but I think it just happens naturally. You set a timer to run for some given amount of time, like 15 or 25 minutes, and then you run like maybe a 5-minute break or something. Maybe it's 10. I don't know the values.
Pomodoro technique?
Yeah.
That's the news. I never heard of that.
Yeah, it's just a way to kind of give yourself like units of work. So you work for 25 minutes, no distractions, just deep in work, and then you take a 5-minute break, do whatever, talk to people, and then you repeat that, and it just kind of gives you a unit to work with. So let's say you want to accomplish 6 to 8 Pomodoros a day, or Pomodori, the plural for it.
Those are tomatoes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's people use like a tomato timer. I forgot where the name actually came from, like the origin, but
Probably some way to make tomato sauce if I had to guess.
maybe.
No, I don't intentionally do that, but I feel like it happens very naturally. Like, I'm just like, okay, I just like worked really hard on something, and I need to some sort of clear, just flush it.
I can't do it. I can't take breaks like that.
No?
Once I get into flow state or like that deep work mode, especially if I'm like in my home office and nobody's bothering me and it's just me and what I'm like really focused on what I'm working on. I can go for maybe if I'm like really into it, I can go for maybe 6 hours, and then I'm typically done.
You don't even take like a bathroom break in that time?
Well, I might, but while I get up, I'm not even like. I'm totally in my head.
Right.
I expect to be like, well, I might. I just have to clean up later.
Like, Jesus. What breaks you out of that? Like, to me, like, I have the same thing, like hyper focus, right? But what I found out recently, what breaks me out of that is a bad habit I have. And the bad habit is, so I'll focus in on it until I figure out the problem. You know, like when the problem is not figured out, then it's like worth sitting there and focusing on. But then as soon as I figure out that problem, it's almost like somebody came and put fairy dust on me. And I'm like, okay, I'm at the refrigerator, I'm at whatever, you know, on the phone, looking at my emails or whatever. It's like all that pressure to do it, and then all of a sudden it's gone.
It's like you pick a problem that is like 18 problems deep. You're like, don't know how to do that, don't know. But that's interesting. I want to figure out how to get there. 3 days later.
And to get there, you have to fix all this other shit in the way. Here's your axe. See you next week.
But that's where it takes the time away, because you're like, it's done. Okay, like I figured it out. I'll just come back later and just put that last, thing on. You have to go right through.
Yeah, it's like, okay, I've accomplished that.
Task list?
Yeah. Or fix the unit test, the next one down.
See, this is I'm glad you brought this up. I'm pretty evangelical about like not just testing, but also test first, like the dogmatic TDD. And the whole reason I like it is because it gives you a finish line.
Right. Well, it tells you I have this gap over here, and if you didn't write that first, you don't know that you have the gap later because you forgot about it.
And the best part is like, so you have this, and you have like your problem space, and once you solve it, like I don't have to write any more code. And it's like there's a very easy trap to fall into when you don't write your test first to be like, oh, I can make it do this, and oh, I can make it also handle this case and this edge case, and but if you don't have that criteria to match, it's like, fuck it, why do I need to write that? That's not the could be's and the what ifs just don't matter anymore. He's like, oh, this is what it wants me to do. And I just ran into this problem today, actually. My boss is like, all right. There's a graph of some sort that was being displayed on a page, but our task in our project management system was like, do this, this, and this. It didn't say anything about hiding this graph. And I'm just like, check. I'm just writing each test one by one, start at the feature level and drive into the unit level, right? And someone I'm like, hey, all these things are checked off. Awesome, done. I don't even think about the outside edge cases anymore. I'm like, if we didn't plan these in the meeting,
right?
Oh well.
We can't do that.
No, but you can.
No, you have more time to do it. Actually, right?
If you're managing all of your projects properly, and you're taking the time to consider all the edge cases, and when you have people requesting new features or anything else coming in, and things are fully thought out. You can put on your blinders and just work on something, but not so much of a problem now. But like when I first started, we were first starting to do a lot of tech stuff, and so a lot of the leadership, as our technical leadership now he's like in control of a lot of things. But back then, a lot of requests and a lot of demands for changes or work here or work there, like they did not adhere whatsoever to a productive dev team. So it made it very hard to even understand like what they wanted, let alone what we should be doing. And sometimes, unfortunately, in the earlier days, it required us to sort of like do things and sort of like anticipate what they would tell us. And you're like, okay, well, clearly what they really want is this, and if they want this, that means that I'm probably going to want to add this other feature, and I'm going to consider this other case. And sometimes you can plan that up front. Sometimes you don't really fully discover exactly what they want until you've done some back and forth. Is terrible.
Oh, it's awful. The back and forth is terrible.
But it can happen.
So I've taken this, maybe this is my immature side coming out, but I've taken this thought of like, okay, I sometimes will bring it to your attention like, hey, maybe you don't want to think about this case. And if they say, no, do it this way, I'm like, you know what? If I always save the day ahead of time, they're never going to know what they're doing is wrong. They're always going to think, hey, this works. I tell him to do a thing, and he just I wish a thing to happen, and he builds me like a genie or something. And they don't appreciate what you actually are doing for them because they just don't know. They can't appreciate it. So I'm like, you know what? If we didn't talk about it, sorry, it's on you at this point.
You could double down on that and actually put bugs in your code that only you know how to fix, right?
That is...
Even get Glenn's bonus, right? Because you'd be like, Glenn would be be less productive.
I'm going to stay out of this conversation because it's being recorded. Glenn's really smart. He hasn't talked much at all tonight. That's really wise. Now you've been quiet right now. It doesn't even matter.
It's like any other Tuesday.
That's true. Yeah. Now, there is a case where I told my boss, hey, 2 of these tests broke. We have no idea what else is going to blow up. We should put this back on QA because we had a contractor work on some stuff. My boss was like, well, just fix those 2 tests and we'll just roll it out to production. I'm like, shouldn't we look at this on QA first? He's like, no, just fix what you know is wrong. I'm like, a third time, I gave him another third effort. Maybe third time's a charm. Nope, don't care, just roll it out. Okay, shit hit the fan. I'm talking the entire thing collapsed. So that was really fun.
Screenshot.
No, I screenshotted it.
Print.
As soon as he said, I don't care, I screenshot and kept it. That was a whole week of staying up to 2 in the morning, though.
Yep. Been there.
Yeah, right, and the weekend. That's important. Because I was also late that Monday, because it was, we found out on a Monday, because I was like, I am not rolling this out on a Friday, you're fucking nuts. I was like, I refuse. And then,
I like my weekends.
Yeah, I was like, I don't trust this, because I already seen shit go crazy, and the developer force pushed some stuff without accepting our changes, which is how I knew shit broke. And then the 2 test cases broke, so I fixed those, and yeah, sure, all the test passed, but remember, like, you saw the coverage report, right? This was too much prior to what you guys just saw, so there's a lot more red. I'm like, man, just because all of our current test pass doesn't mean we've asserted against all of the stuff on this page. We just know the page doesn't crash. But who knows about the JavaScript errors or if we try to traverse the collection or whatever. So I waited till Monday morning, and my boss freaked out. He's like, dude, what happened? I'm like, I told you we shouldn't do it. What do you want from me? So we spent Monday, Tuesday, and half of Wednesday we fix a bug, find a new one, fix a bug, find a new one. At one point, he's like, would it be faster to just have you rewrite that whole thing that took this guy 3 months to work on? I'm like, probably, but we don't know until we do it. Like, it's a gamble because we've already spent 2.5 days on this. Maybe there's only one more bug. Maybe there's 13 more. Like, we don't know. And he goes, just rewrite it. So
roll back the code.
I couldn't.
Oh.
The force push was against the develop branch.
Okay.
And the guy rebased, like, his 8 commits turned into 64 commits by the time he got done rebasing our changes. And they were the same 8 or 10 commits or whatever, just boom, 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 boom. I don't know what the hell happened. But the buddy of mine said he's seen it happen before with weird merges and rebases, but the guy force pushed, and that really pissed me off, and I was like, Jesus Christ. So we just deleted all the crap he wrote. Everything worked like it was in the past, and then we just rewrote the thing. We were told if we got it done by Friday, this on a Wednesday, he goes, if you guys get this done by Friday, I'll give you an extra day of PTO. And I'm like, man, if I break my back and work like 14 hours a day on this, I'm taking more than 1 day off. But I broke my back and worked 14 hours on and got no days off. So, yeah. I was late to work on Monday by an hour and a half or 2 hours or something. And they asked Glenn, like, hey, where's James? And he's like, oh, yeah, he overslept, but he'll be in about half hour. I'm like, oh. Was he up late? And he was like, yeah, till 2 a.m. every day last week. And this weekend. And they're like, oh, okay. Like, that was it.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, oh, dude, I'm still salty about it.
Yeah.
I just, after you bitch about it 10 times, like, nobody wants to hear you bitch about it anymore, right? So, but, is what it is. One day it'll be rectified, one day it won't, and I'll leave. So.
Well, thanks, man. Good talk.
Yep. I assume no more questions?
What do I do? Just hit you up on Slack.
Huh?
I'll just hit you up on Slack in the middle of the workday.
Yeah, I don't mind if you were to ask me one question at a time, by the way. Sometimes when you ask me 6 at once, it's a little hard to like, oh, I guess I'll start at the top.
They're related.
Huh?
They're related.
They are. But you're very thorough, I'll give you that. Your questions are always good questions. They're not like, why doesn't this work? Because that is not a good question to ask.
Granted, the whole camel case thing really threw me off that one time.
Oh, I remember this. I don't remember. Can you remember the... I remember the thing, but I don't remember
I was working on an API, and that was in the context of where if you have a resource route...
is this the route model binding thing?
Yeah. Okay. And I had a name that I guess I just assumed that as long as I, put the right model class and then, whatever parameter name that, I wanted, that it would work. But turns out that it somehow looked at that parameter name and...
There's a naming convention that has to be.
Yeah.
So, I guess you're familiar with route model binding? I think you are. I think we talked about this. Route model binding? So, how many times do you have a controller and a method, and the route will have like an ID field for something.
Is that where you put at in the route?
No, that's for the method name. The at is the method name. So you do like post controller at create.
Right.
Or something. So the first line of the method is generally some model : find, right? And that will do a get and a first for you, or a first, or where ID first, right? So the find method will give you that thing if it finds it, or it'll throw like a 404 or something if it doesn't.
Right. Find or fail.
Yeah, that one. That one. How many times is that like the first line in your controller method? How often?
Probably just about every time.
Okay, you can completely remove this by naming your variable according to Laravel convention and type hinting that variable with the model. Do you want me to show you a case where this happens?
So, if you need the full request, that's your first parameter. Then it'd be user.
The request is actually the second parameter in this case.
Oh, it is.
You would get like you're starting a user.
It would still be the user model.
It'd be the first param. Mm-hmm.
And you would pass it the user ID.
It'd be.
It's going to give you the user model.
Are you pulling this up?
An example. That's pretty.
I can find one too, but I'd have to dig because I'm slowly changing our code base to this.
What you're saying,
yeah.
And it's interesting.
Yeah. He'll get you one, but it's it makes you kind of change. Instead of using like the word ID in your route params, you'll just say user instead of user ID because like you don't want your controller method to have a user ID variable that's a user object. That'd be weird, right? Mm-hmm. So it also gives you like a different look on your route naming a little bit, or your route scheme,
right?
Whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Lumen handles that completely differently.
Lumen doesn't. If Lumen didn't have that, I would die. I'm slowly changing.
It doesn't. I don't know about that particular feature, but the
now I gotta look.
optional parameters it handles completely differently than Laravel does.
Crap.
What is Lumen?
Lumen
Different than how is it different?
It's the stripped down version of
You having trouble finding
Laravel.
No,
it doesn't
no,
have
no, no,
most of the front end stuff. It is just a back end framework.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But since my entire
So
front end's
Blade
written in Angular,
That and switching,
I
I
don't
got
know.
a
but I still
new monitor
use Blade
4K,
for
and
some
like
things.
switching back, like some of
So
those
it's
things
still
are kind of
there.
Is
weird.
it different? You said it was.
What's
a
kind of
different
weird?
Resize. I got a really good monitor. And
So you got to fix the windows.
The
Mm-hmm.
optional
Yeah.
parameters, if you look at the Laravel documentation, it will not be in
I'm gonna use the bathroom.
When you say optional parameters to the route, you mean?
yeah.
What did I want to tell you, Ethan? Do you remember? I said ask me about it later. Can I show you?
I'll think about it.
Here we go. Does anybody care to see an example of that?
Yes.
Okay. So here I'm just calling destroy to get rid of something, typically by ID. So in the route it'll say like project/ID and then the delete method for the HTTP request. So instead of putting in the ID here for what you're actually receiving from the route, you're just doing project and it automatically handles that for you.
Yeah, what's the route look like?
Maybe that's an idea.
Now, that project is coming in from the DI container or something? Is there a binding in the service container for project? How does it know it was all project?
I don't know. That's built in. I've never. That's a good question. Maybe James can answer that. Okay, so here I'm actually just using a resource route, so it gives me everything.
Right.
But the way that works is it's as if you had an ID parameter for the destroy.
I see.
What I- what I said was
It would
weird.
literally be the ID,
the
but
trusted
because
memory.
you've typed into the thing, I want
I
to
just
see
started
the
putting
project.
in my
Maybe
setup.
project.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm set
Okay,
to
so
sell
it's
on
an
Vim
ID.
right now.
Interesting.
Oh.
So
Like plugins and
So
stuff
this
for it?
is the one.
Yeah.
This is says notifications, but you're.
okay, yeah, but so it's actually here on this this projects route in this whole example sort of portal that I'm working on. Are you guys familiar with resource routes?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
It gives you all the API ones at once.
Exactly. Right. So I had this for projects in the projects controller, and then we go into the project controller under the destroy method. You can just do the type, the name of it, and then you have access to it.
You never have to fetch it. Anything.
Right, but that has to come from somewhere. Like so.
Laravel's routing resolves it for you. And if it can't find it, it throws
An error.
the same error you get for find or fail. It throws the same exception, which it catches and turns into a for loop.
So basically, that does a bind. You don't have to go into this service provider and bind project.
Okay. So if you want to deviate from their naming conventions, yes, but you don't have to.
So, but you have to include that somewhere, right? If you go up to the top of your file, you have a used project in there, right?
Yes.
You'd have to.
Yes, because you're type ending.
Yeah, you still have to use project, so you have access to it. But apart from that,
the only reason you have to do it is because you're type ending right there with in the function signature. You're type ending with the project model.
Right.
That's the only reason you have to do that.
Yeah. This is what isn't this dependency injection? Isn't that what that is? Or is that only inside of a controller when it goes into a controller?
No, it still would be. Yeah.
And technicality,
Yeah.
in technicality, it is a form of dependency injection. Yes.
So somehow
It's not Laravel's IOC container.
oh, also it doesn't have to be first in the frames.
It doesn't have to be what?
It doesn't have to be first in the frames.
It does not?
You can do request and then.
You can?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's tight.
So you could
must have done something wrong.
Could you
I
do
ran into that
Could you do more
source
than
node,
one?
and it complained to me. It might be a Laravel version.
Like what if you had two things, like
maybe no.
let's say
Are
you
you
were
one of
doing
the
an
very
AWS
users?
one.
I think so.
Let's say you were doing
When's
an
the last time-
AWS,
when's the last time you
right?
Right.
And it had a parameter for the bucket and it
You
had
can check
a
it.
parameter for the object.
Huh?
Could you check in the bucket also?
Yeah, I think let's go ahead. Is it just
I
Robbie?
suspect you could, yeah.
Like put two.
I would have to
Robbie
test
was
it,
away,
I would
so
assume you could.
I walk up to finding it. It doesn't let you put
I'm
it
asking,
in the challenge.
I'm just writing service provider,
Oh.
Robbie and cause 3.
Okay,
It's just
I
like
told him you'd
AWS.
update the updates every time.
Yeah.
Define
All right.
it.
So
that way.
I'll just tell Robbie bye. Hey Robbie, I forgot I was still streaming. I'm going to go ahead and end the stream because we're wrapping up. I know that Glenn just gave you the link to the repo, but I'll also post it as a comment on the meetup page.
Question mark inside the curly.
And I'm going to wait. Can you give me like a thanks or something in the chat in a few seconds so I can make sure that we're all good?
Yeah, but I mean, it's just so that's.
All right, cool. All right, thanks, man. I'll see you later.
Right. It's good that you called it.
You can get the version from Artisan.